Well, good evening. My name is Bill Purcell. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum this evening. One of the singular initiatives of this Harvard Kennedy School and our Dean David Ellwood is acting in time. Acting in time obviously requires understanding in time, and to that end, the Institute of Politics works very hard to bring the people and the discussions that make that possible in this place. Tonight's discussion could not be more timely or more important, with discussions including Iran to begin very soon. And I believe you'll agree with me that the choice of our moderator makes the importance of that discussion very clear. Ambassador Nick Burns is Professor of Practice of Diplomacy and International Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School. He served in the United States Foreign Service for 27 years, most recently as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs from 2005 until 2008. This is the nation's highest-ranking career diplomatic position. From this position, he led negotiations on Iran, India, Kosovo, was responsible for overseeing U.S. diplomatic efforts in literally every region of the world. Prior to that, he was United States Ambassador to NATO from 2001 to 2005, also served as our ambassador to Greece. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Nick Burns.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Bill, and good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you here to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, and thanks very much to Bill Purcell and the Institute of Politics for its leadership here and for this tremendous forum. We're going to have a good discussion tonight about a very important topic: whether or not the United States and other countries will find their way to peace with Iran in the future, in the next year or two, or find ourselves in conflict and in war with that country. We have two great scholars and practitioners here this evening: Elliot Abrams of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Mohsen Milani of the University of South Florida. I'll introduce them to you in a minute. We have a number of special guests, but I do think I should single out Nadav Tamir, the Consul General of Israel, great friend of the Kennedy School and graduate of the Kennedy School. Welcome, Nadav. Thank you for being with us today. I want to give you a word about context and just try to provide a little frame for the discussion this evening. And first, a word about what is happening in Iran itself. In the aftermath of Iran's stolen election this past June, the dramatic demonstrations that followed in the streets of every Iranian city, especially Tehran, how should we understand the turmoil of Iran's domestic politics and the stability itself of Iran's government? I'm going to ask Elliot and Mohsen to give us their views on the drama being played out in Iran's ruling circles, the largest anti-government demonstrations in the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran this summer, followed by the arrest of opposition leaders and of academics and of journalists and of foreigners. The sinister show trials of opposition leaders in Iranian courts this summer, which were reminiscent to me and to many people of what Joseph Stalin did 70 years ago in Soviet Russia. The unprecedented criticism by Iranians in the political system of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and the apparent struggle for power between, on the one hand, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, supported by the Revolutionary Guards, and on the other, a combination of senior clerics and civilian leaders, some of whom were fathers and mothers of the Iranian Revolution in 1978 and 1979. What is the likely conclusion of this internal struggle for power in Iran? Will the government's brutal suppression of the reformers succeed in propping up the regime of Ahmadinejad for the long term, or are we witnessing the slow unraveling of civil and political order in Iran that could lead to regime change in Iran and perhaps to a new Iranian revolution? That's the first question that I'm going to ask Mohsen and Elliot and all of you to focus on. The second question goes directly to the heart of what's in the interest of the United States, of Israel, of the moderate Arab states, and I believe of the Palestinian people. Will we soon see an Iranian government with a nuclear weapons capability? And if that happens, what will be the consequences for the future peace and stability of the region that is now the epicenter of American policy, the Middle East, It's where we are focused in the world today, and I think it's the epicenter of global politics. Iran already poses at least 3 specific threats to the United States. A nuclear weapons capability that would change the balance of power against us and against most of our friends in the future. First. Second, the fact that Iran is funding and directing nearly all the Middle East terrorist groups that are a problem for the United States and Israel and the moderate Palestinians. And third, the fact that Iran is a neighbor to Afghanistan and Iraq, and in my judgment, has often acted in very unhelpful ways as we seek to stabilize both of those countries. This second major issue that we're going to debate tonight is how President Obama and other world leaders should respond to this Iranian nuclear threat. Now, as Bill said, as he mentioned, the Obama administration made an announcement last week. We, the United States, will send an American diplomat for the first time, really, in 30 years for sustained discussions and negotiations with the Iranian leadership on October 1st. So is President Obama correct to pursue a policy of engagement with Iran? Do the talks have a hope of success after 30 years of no substantial substantive discussions between the two governments? Can engagement, perhaps combined with sanctions, perhaps even with a threat of force, succeed in avoiding war? Or are negotiations an illusion and bound to fail? Would the U.S. be better off using military force to stop the Iranian nuclear effort, or to support an Israeli military strike against Iranian targets? And finally, is there a third way forward between acquiescence to an Iranian nuclear capability and all-out war? And that would be containment. Could the United States seek to lead an international effort to contain Iranian power in the Middle East? We successfully contained the Soviet Union over 5 decades, and Mao's China. Why should we not then attempt to avoid a war, but contain Iranian nuclear power in the process? A final note, and some truth in advertising for this debate. For 3 years, as Bill mentioned, between 2005 and 2008, I was the American negotiator on the Iranian nuclear issue as Undersecretary of State. I spent most of those years, ironically, negotiating with Russians and Chinese and Israelis and French and British and German and South Korean and Japanese diplomats. I never actually met an Iranian diplomat in all those years because it was the policy of the Bush administration not to have diplomatic contact with governments with which we disagreed. So another question for the audience tonight is what President Obama has put forward as a great change in the way that Americans act in the world. Should we be engaging our adversaries and enemies as well as our friends? And I have very strong views on all these issues, but as your moderator, I'm going to try very hard to be objective and ask one final question. Is diplomacy the way forward through a difficult relationship with a truculent and irresponsible government in Tehran, or are we fated for something else? Let me introduce our 2 speakers. Elliot Abrams is a friend of mine. He is a senior fellow at the Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. He served at a very high level in the Bush administration. He was our Deputy National Security Advisor for a lot of that time, responsible for all of our Middle East politics and negotiations, and did a very fine job in the process. He served previously as President of the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, Chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and this must be a record. In the Reagan administration, he was 3 times an Assistant Secretary of State, first for International Organization Affairs, second for Human Rights, and third for Inter-American, Latin American Affairs. He's a graduate of Harvard College, you've all heard of that, of Adams House, of Harvard Law School, and London School of Economics, and the author of 3 books. Please join me in welcoming Elliot Abrams.
Thank you.
Mohsen Milani is one of America's most highly regarded experts on Iran itself. He was born in Tehran. He has long been an American citizen. He's a professor of politics and chair of the Department of Government and International Affairs at the University of South Florida in Tampa. He graduated from the University of Southern California and was a fellow here at Harvard, as well as at Oxford. And he's the author of more than 50 books and articles about Iran, about Iranian internal politics, about Iran's international behavior, and is currently working on a book about Iranian foreign policy. We're very pleased that he made the long trek up from Florida today. Please welcome Mohsen Milani. We thought we'd have a conversation. I'll ask some questions of Mohsen and Elliot. We'll take about 20 to 30 minutes to do that, and then we're going to turn to you. There are 4 microphones here. You can present yourself at that microphone. You can state an opinion, but it needs to be quickly followed by a question. And every sentence you utter must have a question mark at the end of that sentence. I'd appreciate it if you'd abide by those rules. Mohsen.
Yes.
Of the 3 of us, I think you're the expert on what's happening inside Iran, on Iranian politics. So let me ask you this question. Do you believe the Iranian government was weakened fundamentally by the events of the summer, the aftermath of the elections? And do you think there is a prospect that we might see the slow unraveling of that government and a change of government at some point in the next year or 2 inside Iran?
Well, good evening, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I'm very happy that you have set the parameters of our discussion. I am the only expert, and therefore I expect no debate from you for the rest of this
very
evening.
Very good. We'll try to honor that.
Done. I think the question you have raised is an important one, and my short answer to it is that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been weakened considerably domestically, but it has not been weakened internationally yet. If Iran cannot put its house in order in a short term, then you're going to see a weakening of Iranian position regionally. Iran has been weakened essentially because what happened in the June in the disputed election is unprecedented in the history of the Islamic Republic. Now, I know there are people in this place who are convinced that there was a massive electoral fraud in Iran. I'm an expert, and my expertise is based on seeing facts and figures. I do not know whether there was fraud in that election or not. I want to see some evidence. My impression, and I emphasize the word impression, my impression is that there was fraud. But I'm not going to make any judgment about it until perhaps a year or 2 from now. But that is not important. What is important is that the perception in Iran by a significant portion of the population is that there was electoral fraud. And in politics, perception is as important as reality. Now, it has been unprecedented because for the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic, we see a combination of a division within the elites exactly at the time of a massive popular uprising. We've had uprising in Iran after the Islamic revolutions. We've had elite divisions in Iran after the Islamic revolution. As a matter of fact, a year before Ayatollah Khomeini died, his successor was removed in a quiet coup d'etat, Ayatollah Montazeri. But we had never had the combination of elite division and popular discontent from below. And as a result of this unique event, I think the very legitimacy of the Islamic Republic of Iran is now questioned. The Islamic Republic is based on 2 different components. There is an Islamic component symbolizing the institution of the Vilayat al-Faqih, and then there is a Republican. And do you want to
explain that term, Vilayat al-Faqih?
Yes, the rule by the supreme leader, by a religious, by a cleric, by a Shia cleric. Ayatollah Khomeini used to be the Wali Faqih, and now Ayatollah Khomeini is. So it has 2 components, an Islamic component, which President Bush used to call the unelected component of the system. But there was also a Republican component. And that Republican component was based on some sort of democracy. I won't call it Western democracy, I would call it elite-controlled democracy. Now, that balance after the June uprising, that equilibrium is no longer there. Right. And as a result of this, there is a fundamental weakening of the Islamic Republic inside the country. Now, whether this is going to lead to revolution or to a change of regime in the long run, I need more time, and I know my time is up. Maybe I can address it after he.
And I'm sure we'll get some questions on this.
I'll
Good.
be more than happy to.
Elliot, there was an American angle to this drama, particularly in the second half of June. President Obama very clearly tried to keep the United States out of the middle of the problems within Iran. Was he correct in doing that? Or do you think he should have shown more appreciation, respect, support for the people who were putting their lives on the line in the streets?
You know, Bernard Lewis once said that the United States is unpopular in those countries where the population thinks there's a dictatorship and the Americans are supporting it, Egypt. And popular in those countries where there is a dictatorship and the people think we are opposing it, Iran. I think we had a lot more leeway. I think the argument for the administration's policy was, let's not get in the middle of this. To me, the question was not getting in the middle of it. It was even getting on the outside of it. It was saying quickly, you know, it's obvious which side we're on. We are on the side of the people who are fighting for democracy there. I think it was particularly poignant because it's part of a broader pattern. The administration hasn't really done that in Venezuela. It hasn't really done that in China. It hasn't put us on the side of people fighting for democracy in their own countries. It wouldn't have taken much, and I think it was a mistake.
You're a former Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights. You spent a lot of time in the Bush administration trying to forward the principle of democracy. You think the Obama administration missed a chance to do that?
I think so, you know, particularly if they want to move into negotiations. The danger of the negotiations, or a danger, is legitimizing the regime at exactly the wrong moment. You can avoid that really the way Reagan did in his negotiations with the Soviets, which is to say you negotiate with them because they're there while denouncing them. I mean, while saying evil empire. That didn't stop the negotiations with the Soviets. So what he did do was to make it clear to the people of the Soviet Union whose side we were on. Now we're entering into these negotiations at a moment when it is less clear than it should be. The administration has given off a kind of whiff of unhappiness with these demonstrations that have slowed down its negotiating.
There was obviously a rationale to Obama's policy, and I think it was that there was a concern that if the United States injected itself into the middle of the political debate in Tehran, we would have become an actor. Ahmadinejad would have been able to say, perhaps with some credibility, the U.S. is interfering in our system. I actually defended President Obama on this. I thought he made the right call, but we'll just disagree on that. But I want to get to the question you've just posed and ask Mohsen to jump in here. The Obama administration is now going to negotiate with a government that has just put forward a brutal crackdown and imprisoned lots of people, murdered some people. Will we now legitimize President Ahmadinejad by sitting down with him? Is engagement the right way to go with Iran?
I know this is not the right place to quote the former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, but I'm going to.
It could be. It depends what you say.
When people, during the height of the Iraq War, when he was being criticized for not sending enough troops or equipment to Iraq, he said something like, you go to war with the army you have, not with the army you want to have. Well, you negotiate with the government that is in power, not with the government that you think should be in power or you desire to be in power. It is very strange because the same people who have been against negotiation with Iran before June uprising are the same people who are saying now don't negotiate because it is not a legitimate government. Well, they said it wasn't a legitimate government before.
I have to disagree with that. I think of Iran experts like Karim Sajadpour and Shaul Bakhash, who were engagers before June and who are now saying it's awfully dangerous and the risk of legitimizing them is too great. So there are some people who flipped.
But I was talking about not them. I was talking about people who have always been against negotiation. I was in favor of engagement. I still am, but I'm much more qualified in what I propose precisely because of what happened in Iran. But going back to your question, I believe the U.S. has negotiated with governments that have been much more brutal and much more repressive than the Islamic Republic.
Such as
the Soviet Union. We started negotiating with Joseph Stalin right after, well, we recognized the Soviet Union right after the massacre of at least 20 million people by Joseph Stalin. We have negotiated with Mao Zedong. The American government started secret negotiations with Mao Zedong at the height of the Cultural Revolution. And I think they did the right thing. I'm not criticizing it. I think you have to negotiate with your enemy as long as you know what you want, as long as you go to the negotiation table with a definitive agenda and you're self-confident about what you do. It doesn't matter who the other person is. And I think it would be a huge mistake for the United States to get itself involved in the internal struggle in Iran today. I think what President Obama did during the street demonstrations, what he did publicly is absolutely correct, and I give him A+. As a professor, I usually do not give more than C+, but in his case, he gets an A+.
You should come to Harvard. And to get to your point, Mohsen, which I think was a very good one of the issues that the Obama administration has brought forward is that we're dealing with nuclear weapons here. There is a timeline. At some point in the future, Iran will likely become a nuclear weapons-capable state. If you hold off on negotiations, you rob yourself of the opportunity to actually influence that government in some way. But that depends on one assumption, Elliot, that the negotiations can be successful. Do you think they can be? What's the likelihood that when the U.S. starts on October 1st, say by January 1st, 2010, these negotiations will be moving forward and not backward?
Very slim. I mean, remember that the position of the United States was we will not negotiate until there is a freeze on enrichment.
That was the Bush administration.
That was the Bush administration.
Not the Obama administration.
But they have come in and said we want freeze for freeze. And then they've said we will only negotiate if we can discuss nuclear weapons. So the Iranians issue a 5-page paper and then make speeches. No discussion of nuclear weapons. The administration is great. We'll see you tomorrow. Now, that is not a firm negotiating stance. That's the first problem. The second problem is that they're certainly not going to work without the pressure of sanctions. And the pressure of sanctions, you know, the day after the Russian foreign minister said, we don't really think sanctions are a good idea, the threat of sanctions is pretty slim right now. So I wonder what it is that is the pressure on Iran that would make it change its position. Negotiations are really supposed to be more than just chatter. But I wonder if we have the wherewithal to do more than chatter at this point.
So let's think down the chessboard a little bit. Let's play this out. Negotiations start on October 1st. I think the three of us would probably say, we talked ahead of time, that those negotiations are likely to fail. Should they fail, Mohsen, President Obama would be able to turn back to another part of his playbook, what Elliot just mentioned, sanctions. Now, we've tried sanctions. 3 Security Council resolutions we passed between 2006 and 2008, largely ineffective. Didn't seem to have any impact on the Iranian government. Is there a possibility for a stronger sanctions regime? And should energy sanctions on Iran be part of that?
Well, first we have to take the route of negotiations with Iran. And this 5-page proposal that Iran has sent out remind me of what we used to do in elementary school in Iran. We used to write compositions. Is wealth better than knowledge? That was a typical question. Another one was war.
How did you answer?
Well, I made a mistake. I said knowledge.
That's your academic career.
That's right. And then another question was war or peace. That 5-page proposal is basically a sort of very sophomoric proposal. But it was deliberate, because this is the way Iranians negotiate. When you go to a Persian carpet shop, and the person looks at you and figures out that you're interested in that specific carpet, if you ask him, what is the price? He'll tell you this is not for sale. And then once he knows more about you, he's going to sell you that rug. What Iran believes it has is its nuclear capability. And if you expect the Iranians to come and give it away, at the beginning of negotiations, then you're underestimating the shrewdness of these people.
So you'd give the negotiations time, it sounds like. You wouldn't give it a month. You might give it, what, 6 months, a year?
I think it would take at least 6 months to a year before the negotiators can look at each other's eyes and they develop trust. For 30 years, they have been not trusting each other.
And would you insist at some point, if, let's say you're the American negotiator,
Yes.
would you insist that Iran freeze its nuclear research efforts during the negotiations? If you don't, then they're simply going to play out the clock.
If I would have been the negotiators, I would not even start with the nuclear issue. I would start on a number of other issues. I would build confidence, but then I would give myself a year. I would tell them, look, we are going to do X and Y, so you know we are sincere. But be aware.
What is
at
X
the end,
and Y?
Such as what is going on in Afghanistan, what is going on in Iraq.
You mean threatened military force?
No, I'm talking about cooperation between Iran and the United States in terms of building confidence. But then I would put a time limit, that at the end of the year, once we have built confidence, this is what we expect. At that time, I think once that confidence is built, then I'm in favor of freeze for freeze.
And very quickly, I want to get back to give Elliot a chance. Would you leave the threat of military force on the table as you were negotiating if you were an American?
I think the threat of military force should be removed from the table, but it should be brought back, and when it is brought back, America should be damn serious about using it.
Okay.
For 30 years they've been threatening, they haven't used it.
Okay.
Remove it and then bring it back.
Elliot, now we're continuing to play this out. Mohsen has his way, negotiations are held. Let's say they fail. That's the likeliest outcome. Let's say we try the international community sanctions. China and Russia do not participate in those sanctions because they disagree. Therefore, it's a Swiss cheese sanctions regime. They don't work. At that point, hypothetically, would you recommend that the U.S. use military force against Iran to slow down or impede its nuclear weapons research program?
I would recommend either that we do or that Israel does. I think you have to start from your conclusion. What do you think about Iran's getting nuclear weapons? Is it, on balance, not a good thing, or is it something that you're prepared to act to prevent? That is to say, you need to envision a world and a Middle East in which this regime, not Iran, this regime has nuclear weapons. What is the impact on the 60 years of efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation? What is the impact in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf in particular? If you need to make your decision about that, and then, in a sense, reason backwards. Because if your view is, well, it's not that terrible, I mean, we'll work it out, then obviously you should not use military force. If your view is that this is a game changer and it has to be prevented, and by the way, I mean, President Obama has said about 300 times, it's unacceptable to U.S. I don't know what unacceptable means except...
Do you think he would use, President Obama, knowing who he is, how he's governed so far, do you think ultimately, if everything else failed, he would order an American military attack on Iran?
I'm no intimate of President Obama's, but given the record of 8 months, I would say no.
Let me ask you this. Let's say that
but let me just say, this is a problem with the negotiation. I don't agree with Mohsen that, the key thing is to build trust between the negotiators. Even if they have trust. Look, Javier Solana is a wonderful guy. He's trustworthy. His negotiations with the Iranians for several years now have been useless. All they've done is produce gray hair for Solana.
So, Elliot, you're now committed, at least in this hypothetical scenario, to be an advocate of the potential possible use of U.S. military force. Like any good foreign policy expert, you would also think about the ramifications of the use of force before you ordered an airstrike. You'd say, how would Iran react?
Right.
Would Iran attack the United States, Israel, the Palestinian Authority, through Hezbollah and Hamas? Could Iran pose problems to the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan? Could we handle a third war in the Middle East in 1 decade, a third war simultaneously with the two others? What about those consequences? Does that make you pause a little bit?
Sure, you have to have a view of, first of all, can you do this militarily? Secondly, how are the Iranians how is this regime likely to react? And thirdly, what is the political impact inside Iran? Now, the first one I won't speak about. It's obvious the United States could do it. Whether Israel could do it is a separate question, and one could spend days debating that. What is Iran's reaction likely to be? I think the word war is really not right. Iran's not going to have a war with the United States. That would be suicidal. The threat that Iran makes now is, if anything happens, we will attack all of the American bases on the other side of the Gulf. Those are all its neighbors. You actually think Iran is going to attack simultaneously Bahrain and Kuwait and the UAE, and they're also going to throw in the Saudis and hit some oil installations all in one day? It seems to me very unlikely. I really wonder, let me put it this way. The question is the right question, but one should not assume, if we want to assume that we can negotiate with this regime because they're in fact rational, it is not rational for them to have a war with the United States. Why assume they would do it?
On the other hand, if I were counterpunching, which I'm not, I'm an objective moderator, I would say, but Iran seems to have controlling authority over Hezbollah and fairly decisive influence with Hamas. Even if they chose not to respond in a conventional way, they could respond the way the Shia and Sunni militants in Iraq have responded to us for 6 years, or the way the Taliban has responded to the U.S. military and NATO in Afghanistan, asymmetrically, guerrilla warfare. That could be tough for the United States. But I want to roll back a minute. We've gotten all the way down the road to war. I think,
not war.
One cardinal principle of diplomacy is you don't want to leave your leader with one option. So if negotiations fail, if sanctions fail, is President Obama left only with the option of military force, or is there a realistic option, as I suggested in my remarks, of containment?
Yes.
So in other words, Mohsen, could the United States, through security guarantees to Israel and its Arab friends, through augmenting our military presence in the Persian Gulf, and through the threat of force if attacked, could we contain Iran without resort to war? Is that realistic?
Not only it's realistic, I think it's practical as well. And the reason why I say that is that the fundamental assumption of people who advocate war with Iran, you don't have to call it war. Iranians will call it a war when you attack their nuclear reactors. It doesn't matter what you want to call it, but they're going to call it something else. And once they call it something else, it is very easy to start it, as we learned in Afghanistan. It is very difficult to end it. And imagine attacking Iran, and then imagine for a minute, for those of you who have a pretty good understanding of geography of that region, go from Afghanistan at war, Iran at war, Iraq at war, and then to Lebanon, and it is going to be a major regional war. Now, the fundamental assumption is that the leadership in Iran is irrational because they are religious, and another assumption is that they are suicidal. Now, here is what I can tell you with confidence, and I can give you example after example. Iranian leadership is not suicidal, although it supports idiots who are suicidal, which is very different.
You want to name them?
No, because then they're going to come after me. They are not suicidal, and as a matter of fact, if there is one thing that you can see in the history of the Islamic Republic, is its instincts for survival.
Then they're not going to have a war with the United States.
But
it would be irrational and suicidal.
Yeah, but if you attack another country, if you go and take out...
Well, take the example of the Israeli attack on Syria at Al-Kibar, where they took out their nuclear reactor.
Yes.
The Syrian response was silence.
Well,
I just want to say one thing on this, because I think it's an important point to make. We talk about containment. Containment is a military action. Let's be clear on this. Containment does not take place at a negotiating table. Containment, if you can use the Soviet model, containment is a threat of military force. So if we're saying we're going to contain Iran, what we're saying is we won't use military force. Next year, we'll threaten it.
We wouldn't initiate, which is a very important distinction, actually.
I think that's the key distinction.
But it is, I don't think so. I think the key is whether you are willing to use military force against Iran. If you're not, I think the problem is that it makes the negotiation much less likely to be successful.
So, Elliot, if you were back in the White House advising President Obama, however unlikely that scenario would be,
set of circumstances.
And if these two options were presented, Mr. President, we have the option of the use of military force. We have the option of containment, which is the U.S. not initiating military force, essentially trying to surround Iran with power. Would you tell him the containment option is an illusion and unworkable? Or would you say that it has a chance of working? That might have a big impact on his thinking.
Well, I think I would say to him, as we think this through, we have to ask ourselves whether the failure of the United States to prevent, United States and our allies, to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon will give rise to an Israeli strike on Iran. And then we have to ask ourselves, do we favor that or oppose it? Is it in the interest of the United States or against the interest of the United States? That's got to be factored in as you think about whether containment is possible or likely to work.
Good. Can I just say, let's end there and deal with one.
Because that's the key element. Quick to, because I was interrupted.
Fair enough.
The assumption is that they are not rational, and therefore the language of force is the only language they understand. The 2003 National Intelligence Estimate, which said that Iran halted its nuclear weapons program. I do not know if this is accurate or not. But there was something that I think was even more important than that conclusion. In that report, it is very explicit that the 16 major intelligence agencies in this country concluded that Iran halted its program because of a cost and benefit calculation, which tells you that you are talking about a bad regime, but a regime that is not suicidal.
They halted it when we went into Iraq.
Which confirms my point.
That's the language of force.
Okay, one more question.
Yes.
Because you prompted another question
Yes.
before we give the students a chance to talk and ask their own questions. Are Israeli and American interests parallel or even identical here? If it's in Israel's interest to use force should diplomacy not succeed, is that also the American interest? Awesome.
I think by wisdom and by age, he is old.
He's going to get the last word.
Oh, he is?
Yeah. He always does. He's going to get the last word.
Let me first make it very clear that as far as I'm concerned, and I've said it many times, not only in this country, but I've said it in Iran when I went back to Iran, that it is not in the national interest of Iran to get itself involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially with the Palestinian issue. I've said it, and I'm going to say it, and I know you told me this is on record.
Does Ahmadinejad agree with you?
Not only Ahmadinejad does not agree with me, Ahmadinejad has made a few comments that are absolutely despicable.
Right.
Absolutely despicable and irresponsible. The head of a state does not have the right, even as a joke, to call for another country to be destroyed. You just don't do that. I don't care whether the language he used was proper or not. If it was not a proper language, when he found out that other people are interpreting it that way, he should have come out and made it very clear that that is not what he believes. And furthermore, to make the claim that the Holocaust was a myth, I think this is beyond the pale. So having said that, I believe it is not in the interest, long-term national interest of even Israel to attack Iran. And I'll just give you one example and no more. In Iran, we have a government that is anti-Israel and has strong anti-Semitic tendencies. But the Iranian population is not anti-Semite. We have had a long history, glorious history of helping our Jewish brothers. The Iranian population at large is not anti-Semite. Attack Iran. You turn Iran into an anti-Semitic country. Don't do that. Use every other means you can. It is a threat. It is a serious threat, and I agree with you. If I would have been an Israeli policymaker, if another president of another country would have said, I want to wipe you out from the map of the earth, and then they were about to have an atomic bomb, I would get edgy. I would get nervous.
I do want to give you the last word, but I forgot to ask a key question, and your remarks just prompted it. If the United States or Israel use military force against Iran, would that weaken the Iranian reformist movement? And would people rally around the government?
I think in the short term, there is no question. And there is a precedent. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein attacked Iran. And there were a lot of Iranians, and I happened to be one of those revolutionaries in those days. A lot of Iranians from all walks of life, the minute Iraq invaded Iran, they said, it is time to defend the country. Why do you think the Mujahideen Khalq are so unpopular in Iran? They are unpopular because when Iraq invaded Iran, they did not take the side of Iran, i.e. the government. When you are attacked, you have to go and rally behind the flag. Please remember, Iranians are no different than Americans. They're human beings. Our DNA are the same. 99% of our DNAs are the same. I remember September the 11th, when I saw the symbol of America getting attacked. I couldn't believe it. I cried. And I had to rally behind that flag.
Right.
Can I just...
And it's going to happen the same thing in Iran.
Jump in on here, because again, we're talking about...
Last word, Elliot.
We're talking about war. There will not be a war between the United States and Iran. Nobody's talking about invasion. Nobody's talking about soldiers. This is not Iran, Iraq. The model would be what happened between Israel, if the Israelis do it, and Iraq or the Al-Kibar reactor in Syria. This did not cause a war with Syria. Iranians, if this were to happen, would wake up and find out that something had happened the previous night in locations they may not even know exist. So the political impact, it seems to me, is something that has to be thought about. In the Balkans, there is some precedent for thinking that this would weaken an unpopular regime. So I take it as I don't think the word war is the right word, and I think the question of the impact, not in January, but now, when this regime is so widely unpopular, really needs to be thought through carefully.
Okay. Let's end it. We could continue this, and that's a key point as to how the Iranian people would react, but let's give the microphones to the students. There are microphones here and here, on this balcony and on this balcony. I would just ask, I'll call on you, sir, first. Tell us your name, where you're from, and a question, please.
Yes. My name is Zayal. I'm from Israel. I'm a mid-career student. I want to first comment. I don't think Iran is not rational, and I don't think it's suicidal. I think it seeks domination in our region, and I think that you would agree after comparing them to Soviet Union and China. So in this perspective, asking about containment, I would appreciate your opinion of what kind of message will that deliver. How do you think counter-proliferation could be any better than it was so far? What kind of message do you think this will be given to the moderate Islamic countries in our region, such as Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia? And what kind of message do you think this delivers to Israel? Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Elliot.
I think we, as we try to think through the counter-proliferation question after, we're assuming now Iran has a nuclear weapon, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to see what you would do to persuade, first, some Arab countries in the region, or Turkey, that they should not think about getting nuclear weapons. I don't know what it is you would do for Israel. I mean, if we had better anti-missile defenses, I guess we could share them with Israel. Maybe in that circumstance, one should think about helping Israel get a strong and clear second strike capability against Iran. The problem, though, is that, as Rafsanjani once said, Israel is a one-bomb country, and there's nothing you can do unless you have perfect missile defenses to cope with that.
I would just add to what Elliot has said, if you're thinking about containing Iran or even defeating Iran, you're not just looking, if you're an American at Israel, you're looking at the Gulf countries as well, at the United Arab Emirates, at Saudi Arabia, at Kuwait, at Bahrain. These countries are going to have an interest in their own security. And so American policy has to be not just based on Israel, but on the Arab world itself. Yes, sir.
My name is Ahmed. I'm first year in MPID. My question to you is, if you look at other countries that have developed nuclear weapons like India, it comes from a perceived threat from China, and then subsequently in Pakistan it comes from a perceived threat from India that they developed nuclear weapons. Would that be the case that in case of Iran, it's advisable to take the threat of attack or violence against Iran off the table, so that the perceived insecurity they might have, they might feel more secure in giving up their nuclear weapons?
Thank you. Awesome.
I think you're absolutely correct, and deterrence, in my judgment, is the key component of Iranian policy, regional policy, as well as its policy toward the United States. Now remember, Iran was attacked in 1980, and Iranians' deterrence strategy started in the 1980s as a result of Iraq's invasion. But then after that, they decided to continue developing it. Now imagine you are a policymaker in Iran, and you have about 60,000 American troops in Afghanistan and about 150,000 American troops in Iraq, and you're basically sandwiched. What are you going to do? What you're going to do, as any rational actor would do, you would try to develop a retaliatory capability. And I think this is exactly what Iran has been doing in Afghanistan, developing an indigenous, Afghan-based retaliatory capability against America in case of an attack on Iran. They're doing the same thing in southern part of Iraq. They have done the same thing in Lebanon with thousands of weapons, of missiles. And I think this is why Iran is planning to develop the nuclear capability to build the bomb should they decide to build the bomb. Now remember, we've been talking about Iran's nuclear programs and all of this. Most of what we've been saying is not based on evidence. We are speculating. And I am doing the same thing. I don't think Iran has the bomb yet, as far as I know. But I do believe that Iran is determined to build the capability, to build the bomb very much like Japan, should they decide to build the bomb, if they are attacked or if they are threatened seriously.
And just for the record, Japan has not taken that step as a matter of national policy.
I just want to clarify that the NIE said that they stopped developing a warhead in 2003 when the United States went into Iraq. Clearly, the decision to move forward with a militarized nuclear program was taken before the United States acted in Afghanistan or Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
My name's Daniel Berman. I'm a research assistant at the Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. My question sort of goes back to the domestic politics in Iran at the beginning, which is, since the elections, we've had a row over the vice president's position in Iran. We've had Ahmadinejad's spiritual mentor suggest that when the supreme leader endorses the president, they transfer God's authority towards them. We've had the Speaker of Parliament raise the specter of Bani Sadar's fate. Are we seeing a split between the president and the supreme leader, with perhaps the president positioning himself as sort of a rallying figure for opposition now that the reformists seem to be out of the game? And what impact will this have on U.S. relations and the nuclear program?
That's a very insightful question. I would just add for Moser and Elliott another question on top of yours. Are we also seeing the militarization of the Iranian government? Is Ahmadinejad effectively aligning himself with the military against the clerics? Mohsen.
Well, let me start with your question, because then in your question I can also answer his. The answer is yes. I think that process really started after the end of Iran-Iraq war. It began to accelerate when there was an abortive student uprising in 1999 when Khatami was president. A group of Iranian Revolutionary Guards sent a letter to him, and they told him that they are not going to allow Iran to become the next Soviet Union, and they're not going to allow him to become Iran's next Gorbachev. And I think from that moment, you see increased power by the Revolutionary Guards, and I think it has continued, and after this election, it has intensified. Now, back to the question the gentleman asked, I think what you are seeing in Iran today is that the political spectrum has shifted drastically to the right. And therefore, the competing elites, the competing factions now, it used to be between the reformists and the radicals. Now they are between two different sides of the conservative camp. The traditional conservatives that Larijani and others represent, versus the neo-conservatives, Ahmadinejad, and I don't mean it in a bad way.
Let me say, as a neoconservative,
I didn't mean to suggest you're aligned with them.
He'll get his moment.
Yes. So basically, you're talking about different factions of Iranians right now. That is what we are seeing.
I would just add that I think you said at the beginning, Nick. The loss of Qum, the loss of clerical support for this regime, is a huge event in the history of the Iranian Revolution. it had a Republican part and a religious part, the Islamic Republic. And the Islamic Republic is now losing both parts. I mean, the Republican part because they stole an election, apparently, and the Islamic part because you have people like Montazeri, but many others signing petitions and saying this regime is illegitimate. So, I mean, the foundations are, there's hardly anything left but hatred of Israel and hatred of women that are really the pillars supporting this regime. So I think it's very serious, and I think, in fact, that if, pick a number, 20 years from today, 25 years from today, the regime is gone, when we look back and ask, how did that happen? The delegitimization of this regime in the eyes of the clerics will be critical.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Jeff Klein. I'm from Boston. And I want to direct my question to you, Ambassador Burns, and the organizers of this forum. And I want to speak very personally. I'm the parent of a student at Harvard College. I want to ask you, what message does it send to the students here when you invite and give a respectful platform to a person like Elliot Abrams to speak about democracy in Iran when he himself was the organizer and paymaster? Let me finish. I'm going to be very brief.
Keep this very brief.
I am going to be very brief.
Please be civil, and please have a question.
I'm being civil. I'm being truthful, in my opinion. Mr. Abrams was indicted for lying about his activities in Central America by the federal government. He plea bargained by admitting his fault,
Sir,
was pardoned by... My question is, what message does it send to the students here, not only to invite this man to comment about democracy in Iran, but to elide the description of who he is and what his history is?
I'll be happy to give you the answer that you're looking for. Perhaps it's not what you're looking for, but I'll give you the answer that you deserve. It is a question. And the answer is, Elliot Abrams is a patriotic American who has served several administrations. He has been a public servant. He is a model for what one can do to give up perhaps the riches of the private sector to focus on service of the public. And I know personally, because I worked with him very closely in the last administration, that he is a sincere, truthful, and upstanding person. That's your answer. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you thank you. Yes. Please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Azadeh, MPP2. My question is, you spoke about the damage that a potential war with Iran could make in the perception of Iranians regarding Americans. Now, I'm curious to know what you think America's quest for engagement with Iran would do to the natural course of democratization that we are seeing in Iran in terms of people's desire for change. Thank you.
I think I am a Democrat, small d. But I think democracy is not like an automobile. You don't export it. You just can't do it. It is not possible. And it can't be done by use of force. It has to be something that people desire. They have to come to the conclusion that they need it. Otherwise, it is not going to be done. I'm in favor of engagement. And I'm also in favor of American government pushing for human rights in a very public and open way. But I am against any kind of interference on the part of the United States, at least publicly, any kind of interference in Iran's internal affairs or taking sides in Iranian power struggle. We took side one time, back in 1953, and we paid a heavy price for it. I think what you have seen in the past month or so is that Iran is not the kind of society that the mass media in this country depicted. It's a dynamic society. It is a very educated society. It is a very sophisticated society. This problem in Iran is an Iranian problem. It has to find an Iranian solution. And if the United States, under the capable leadership of Obama, refuse to interfere in what is going on, within the next 1 or 2 years, you're going to see wonderful things taking place in that country.
I suspect we have a difference of opinion here.
Yeah,
I
I
want to
think
give Elliot
where we may disagree is on the definition of interfere. What does interfere mean? The United States supported dissidents in the Soviet Union and in the Soviet bloc. Was that interference? I don't know. It was certainly something we did as a matter of both politics and conscience, and it probably helped shorten the life of the Soviet Union. We've done that in a lot of places. We interfered when we did a boycott of South Africa because of apartheid. We interfered to push Marcos out in the Philippines. So I guess my problem with the way you put it is that it seems to me that you would swallow up the whole support of human rights and democracy by the United States government. Now, I don't want to interfere either, but I do want it to be very clear to Iranians which side we're on. I think the mass media here do give a pretty good sense that whatever is going on in the regime, Iran is a very sophisticated and complicated society. That doesn't mean to me that we shouldn't be very clear in expressing our view, our horror, for example, of some of the things the regime has done recently. I hope that when Bill Burns sits down with the Iranians, they want to have a broad discussion.
Bill Burns being the American designated
to be at the negotiating table.
Right.
How about starting with the Newsweek reporter and saying, free him? That should be on the table.
A Newsweek reporter who is under arrest.
Under arrest in Iran, right. American citizen.
Right. Okay, thank you both. Yes.
I just want to draw an analogy and ask a pedagogic question, I guess. I'm an Iranian student from HBS, Harvard Business School. The way I imagine Iran myself, the way I picture Iran is like a puber child, basically, who is irreverent, stubborn, trying to seek identities, trying to establish itself and gain recognition. And at the same time, a puber which has been marginalized, is living in the slums, doesn't have many opportunities for growth. Iran is a pariah state who is seeking recognition, basically. And my question is fundamentally a pedagogic one. How do you deal with such a puber? Do you threaten it with house arrest and with beatings? Or do you offer it a scholarship to come to Harvard and study here and have a career? It's the same thing as you're facing with Iran. Do you threaten to invade it or to bomb it down, or do you give it actually an opportunity to join the World Trade Organization, go into all kinds of, engage with trade and to have its population? And the second question is, even if you offer them the second with engagement, what we're doing, is that really credible while at the same time you tell them if you don't do that, we'll go and beat you and put you in house arrest? I wonder how credible that will be.
Well, on the first part, I think we have offered it. There have been a number of offers made. Nick may actually have been there when one of them, or I guess was Bill Burns the person who sat at the table?
Yes.
We, the P5 plus one, that is the permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, have made a number of offers to Iran to do what you're suggesting we should try to achieve, which is help them modernize the economy, help them bring Iran out of pariah status in exchange for abandoning the nuclear weapons program. I would agree with you that that offer should be made. The problem is, at what point do you say, okay, you're adolescent, or Iran has actually expressed no interest in it and has said no? Then you would have to ask about your adolescent. What do I do if he tries to seize a gun? Do I let him have the gun? I mean, the analogies are always stretched. But I would argue that we have, in fact, done that with Iran. Those offers are on the table, and they're pretty good offers. And Iran has shown no interest whatsoever in the Western offer.
Can I say something?
Yes, very, very quickly.
In 2003, I believe Iran actually engaged and approached the U.S., sent letters via the embassy to engage with the U.S., and that was just completely neglected.
I've heard that several times, but when you ask people, like Colin Powell, why didn't you respond, or Condi Rice, why didn't you respond, they say, what are you talking about? I had no such letter. What I can tell you, what's a matter of clear record, is the P5 plus one put these offers on the table, and they were pretty generous offers about opening up to Iran. But if you don't think they're generous enough, what would have happened if the regime had said, well, that's not generous enough, let's negotiate? They would have gotten more.
This is actually a very important point, because from June 1, 2006 on, there were repeated offers by the Perm 5 countries in Germany to negotiate with Iran. So the negotiating actually started 3 years ago. Iran has not responded to any of those overtures. It'll be interesting to see if they treat President Obama's participation in a more serious way. One would hope so. Mohsen.
Engagement is a multifaceted phenomenon. And I think the U.S. is well advised to separate political engagement at the state level with people-to-people exchanges. The U.S. is very popular inside Iran and amongst the Iranians. And I think there are so many ways the United States can indirectly influence Iranian politics. For example, as you suggested, by giving more visas to the Iranian students coming here and going back, or to start exchange programs, athlete exchanges, all kinds of stuff. We should not lump them all together. For 30 years, more or less, we've done that. Americans know very little about Iran, and the Iranian population knows very little about America. And I think it's time to change that. And it is the best investment in the long run. China changed its way only because of engagement on economic and cultural level. And that, I think, is the key to a successful engagement in the long run.
Let me just say, I agree with that completely. I think that's absolutely right. And I think the engagement that we need is less with the regime and more with the people of Iran, and we're not doing enough.
I agree. And it's nice to see you
we
both
could
in
agree.
agreement. It's very nice to see that.
It took an
and
hour,
I'll further
but
the agreement. There is bipartisan agreement in Washington among Republicans and Democrats on this issue. We have been trying, we the United States, to open up not government to government so much, people to people. That's been mightily resisted by the Iranian government. Even students coming here to the United States have been accused of being treasonous, of acting in a treasonous way towards the government and nation of Iran. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Arash, and I'm from Iran also. And
you're from Iran?
Yeah, I'm from Iran. With all due respect to Professor Milani, as someone who lived all his life in Iran, I would disagree with you about the Iranian and anti-Semitism, because I strongly believe that Iranian believes in anti-Semitism, and that's because they believe in Islamic State. And in Islam, usually Muslims are against Jewish people, or Yahudi that we call it in Iran. So imagine, just assume that with 1% chance I'm right, and then the US starts the negotiation with Iran, and as you said, it would take a long time to get a result from those negotiations. How about if in that process Iran gains the sufficient technology for a nuclear weapon and therefore attack Israel? Like, what would be Israel's reaction to that, and what should Israel do to prevent that from happening?
Well, I live in a free country, and people are free to be wrong or to be right. I happen to disagree with you. My experience is different than yours, and my understanding of anti-Semitism is very different than yours. So, and I don't think this would be an appropriate place for me to tell you why I have reached that conclusion. But I think the second part of your question is much more important, and that is, what if Iran attacks Israel? Well, anything can happen in this world. But Iran doesn't have a bomb yet. Let's be realistic about it. And secondly, you have to explain to me what would be the justification. What would be, not the justification, what would be the rationale? Why would somebody sitting in a mosque in Tehran, assuming that this regime stays intact, why would they want to attack, destroy Israel, knowing that they have only one bomb and Israel can turn Iran into a parking lot? It is possible. I don't say it is not possible, but it is not very probable as far as I'm concerned, because I believe deterrence, containment and deterrence does work. I believe Iranian leadership, the current leadership, is a very calculating and extremely conservative regime, and it respects power more than most people can imagine.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, my name is Amtul. I'm from Pakistan. My question is,
and where are you from?
I'm from Pakistan.
Pakistan, thank you.
Okay, my question is, is there any indication that change in regime would shift Iran's stance on his nuclear capability?
That's a very good question. Excellent
question.
some form of nuclear program was begun under the Shah, which suggests that this is a deeper longing than simply that of one particular leader or another. But the real problem here is the regime, not the nuclear program. That is, you know, I wouldn't lose sleep if Canada decided to get a nuclear weapon. Raise your hand if you disagree with that, but that's one. There were a number of countries that had nuclear programs that ended them, Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Ukraine, after a change of government toward democracy. So, you know, I like to believe, and I don't think this is hard to believe, that if Iran had a change of regime and had a democratic government, our ability to negotiate with that government about the kind of nuclear program it had would be greatly enhanced, and we wouldn't be in this mess. The mess we're in stems largely from the nature of this regime, its support for terrorism, and its threats against Israel.
But it is an irony of the current situation that Mir Hussein Mousavi, Rafsanjani, Larijani all supported, we assume, the nuclear weapons development program. So it's not a question of reformers against nuclear power, as you suggest, and Ahmadinejad for. It's much more complex.
I think, again, I don't have any polls. I can only tell you my impression based on knowing the psyche of Iran as a civilization. Iranians have imperial complex. They believe that they once were, and they were, a great empire. And if you have that complex and you look around and you see your country having a bomb, India having a bomb, Israel having a bomb, they say, why not us? This transcends your ideology, transcends your class. And I think I agree with you that the question is, what kind of regime do you have? Who is going to be in charge of that bomb? Do you want somebody like Ahmadinejad? Well, by the way, as all of you know, and I need to emphasize that, even if Iran does have that capability, it's not Ahmadinejad who decides Iran's nuclear policies and program. It's Ayatollah Khamenei. But I think you're absolutely right. I think Iran has started a path that is not reversible.
We have a number of people who want to, thank you very much for your question. A number of people want to ask questions. I'll ask you to just make them brief. The responses will be brief, and we'll try to get everybody included at each of the 4 microphones. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Yanai, and I'm a mid-career student from Israel. My question is, assuming that Iran is pursuing a nuclear bomb, what would you speculate might be the specific path it would choose in getting this bomb, taking into account its previous declaration and international committees? And if I may add very shortly, isn't containment kind of saying we won't take a brave decision now and bear the consequences in the sake of postponing them for taking much braver decisions and bearing much graver consequences?
Well, I agree with the last part. I think that's the problem, that if you're not willing to act when Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, how likely is it you're going to act when they do have a nuclear weapon? It's not logical. It is true that the Ayatollah Khamenei and others have said possession of nuclear weapons is un-Islamic, and therefore we do not want such a weapon. I don't know what they would say to the Pakistanis, but that's their problem, not mine. But I think what they could say, you know, look, if they want a nuclear weapon and that's a ruse, what they could say is, we are forced into this by the circumstances of the United States and here, Israel, aggression against us. We don't like it. We will get rid of it as soon as we can when the world situation changes and when there is global nuclear disarmament, which is something that is in the 5-page proposal from Iran. That's what they want to talk about. So, you know, if you want to go down that road, I think there are ways for the regime to talk their way around their previous statements.
I think I would support General Abu Zaid, a 4-star general, who said that the U.S. should do everything the U.S. can to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. But if it does, he says, the U.S. is well capable of containing Iran as it contained the Soviet Union and China and a lot of other countries. I think he knows a little bit more about this than I do.
Yes, sir.
I would just add one word in that very quickly, that containment cost well over 100,000 lives in places like Korea, Vietnam. I mean, containment was an expensive proposition.
And yet it did prevent a thermonuclear war between the United
did.
States, Soviet Union, and Mao's China. Not an insignificant historical development.
By threatening the Soviets with that war.
And as you said, containment is a military-edged policy. Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name is Ari. I'm from Chicago, and I'm a freshman at the college. Mr. Abrams mentioned that a possible retaliation in response to an American or Israeli strike could be for Iran to attack U.S. bases in the Middle East. Another possible reaction could be to mine the Strait of Hormuz, which would have a drastic effect on Iran's oil exports, but possibly a worse effect on the global economy. Assuming there was U.S. knowledge of or cooperation on the strike, what preemptive measures could the U.S. take to combat the mining, and how serious of a threat do you see this as to the global economy?
Well, the outbreak of violence in the Gulf of any kind, including the kind we're talking about, would cause a huge spike in oil prices and drop in markets. The question would be, how long could the Iranians keep the straits closed? And, you know, I'm not a Navy captain. My understanding is a relatively limited amount of time, weeks, not months. So that, you know, the oil prices would start coming down again. But I think it is a question to be asked, and you're asking it, not something we should assume that we know what Iran's reaction would be. I'm not sure what it would be, and I think the assumption that it's, you know, all-out Middle East war needs to be questioned.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. Yes.
My name is Harlan, and I'm a freshman at the college. My question stems from something Mr. Milani said, which is the why not us principle. Analysts seem to agree that once nations develop nuclear capacity, or as they're going down the road to nuclear development, they get attention on the international stage that was unprecedented. So in terms of what my generation can look to, in which up to, or as many as the world's 200 countries, any of which can develop nuclear capacity, is there a long-term strategy for deterrent, or is the only answer to be individual engagement on an individual basis?
Excellent question. Yes.
Well, I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that excellent question you have, because I think the NPT is becoming obsolete, and it has to be renegotiated. And I think the vision that you are describing requires commitment not only from the countries that want to become a nuclear power, but the countries that are already nuclear power. Morality cannot be selective. You cannot say some countries can have it because they are my friends, and other countries cannot have it because they're my enemy. It's not going to work. Americans might buy it, Europeans might buy it, but the countries, developing countries, are not going to buy that. So there has to be consistency in that NPT. I think that the countries that have become nuclear, I think they need to make a commitment, visible, identifiable, verifiable commitment to reduction of their nuclear weapons. And at the same time, the countries like Iran that are aspiring to become nuclear power, they must be stopped.
You might consult the Belfer Center website, Belfer Center here at the Kennedy School. Professor Matt Bunn is here. Will Toby's a senior fellow. They're both experts on this issue of nuclear proliferation. There is a review conference for the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, in 2010. And the Obama administration is beginning to work out its position. So it's a very good question. And there's a lot of expertise at this school. I'm sure that they'd be happy to talk to you about that issue. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, sir.
Hi. Thank you for coming here today. My name is Chris Holliday, and I'm a junior at the college. My question centers around the recent presidential election results in Iran. And it seems like we can have two different courses of action. One would be to support the current regime and try to negotiate with them, which may or may not lead to desirable results. Or we can try to support the opposition that has recently come out of the presidential election, keeping in mind that in doing so, while they may be more willing to engage with the U.S., they are still part of the anti-Western revolutionary establishment. And also, by overtly supporting the opposition, it kind of strengthens the current regime's argument that we are trying to undermine their government. So my question is, what should we do moving forward? Should we support one side or the other, or maybe neither?
Thank you. Now, I'd just say, to be fair to President Obama, he is definitely trying not to support.
Yes.
the Ahmadinejad government, but he's also trying to sit down with that government. So it's a slightly different phraseology than the question. If I could just repose it like that to Mohsen.
I think you need to ask yourself one very important question. Why is it that none of the leaders of the Green Movement have publicly asked for U.S. support? If somebody is not asking it, don't give it.
Well, I don't think that's quite fair. I mean,
I think that's why I said publicly. I mean, what happens behind the scene is not subject of our discussion here, but I'm talking about public. I'm talking about diplomacy. Sometimes the most difficult thing to do in life is to be silent, as you have learned today. Sometimes you don't have to do anything. Just stay on the sideline, watch the development, and at the right time intervene. Patience is the best remedy at this time. Be patient, don't interfere.
Did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, the difficulty is this just happened in June. And since then, there's been a bit of a reign of terror in Iran. And we read this week about the arrest of grandchildren of people like Montazeri. There have been deaths. There are American citizens in prison there, too. At this moment, to jump into negotiations with that regime isn't neutrality. It runs the risk of strengthening the regime, of strengthening them in the eyes of the Iranian people, because we seem to be indifferent. This is when we're engaging. That, I think, is the problem. I understand the president's desire to be neutral, but to follow this behavior pattern by the regime, by now jumping into the negotiation, runs an enormous risk. Now, you could say, how do you counteract that risk? By not staying silent, by speaking out. And I don't think we've done enough of that.
Can I just say, in order to just defend what I think President Obama tried to do, he was decidedly not trying to be neutral. He was very critical of the Iranian regime. He decided, though, that there wouldn't be a press conference 3 times a day to talk about it, so as to take us out of the limelight. But he wasn't being neutral, and he actively said that.
I think the administration waited quite a while, and I think even now, there have been many appeals, not, of course, from Rafsanjani or somebody like that, but many students and others have said, where are you guys? Meaning the Americans. I think we've been remarkably quiet. And again, there's nothing wrong with being quiet in principle. But as we are entering a negotiation with the regime, it seems to me it's incumbent upon us to make it very clear that we don't want this to redound to their benefit.
I think there is one thing that has been implied here. And I think it's very dangerous for people to make that conclusion. What is implied is that, on the one hand, you have a group of reformists that enjoyed the support of overwhelming majority of the Iranians. And on the other hand, you have a rogue regime with absolutely no popular base of support, very much like North Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is the way you think, you are mistaken, deeply mistaken. Iran is a highly divided society. I don't know the numbers, whether it is 45-55, whether it is 48-52, I don't know. It is not that the other side does not have a popular base of support. Iran is a divided society. Why do you want to entangle in this? What are you going to gain? You support one side, you're going to make the other side enemy. Think in the long term. Stay away, be quiet, let them work it out, let them come out with the solution, and then go ahead and deal with the Iranian crisis.
I'm going to ask both of you to make a closing statement. Before we do that, I think we have time, unfortunately, just for 2 more questions, and I apologize. Thank you for your question. So I'll take one question here and one from here, please.
My name is Sharif Fam. I'm from Egypt, and thank God I'm not a student anymore. Anyway, it seems that the cardinal assumption underlying all these conversations, and especially tonight, is that the assumption, the suspicion, or the belief that Iran is building a nuclear weapon on the sly. There is no evidence, as I have read it from any intelligence agency, as was written in the papers or in the media, any American intelligence agency or the United Nations there is no evidence that Iran is building such a weapon. And it is quite alarming to me to hear all that conversation about war, about bombing, about Israel doing this, about us doing that, based upon assumption, which is a terrible reminder of Iraq. Now, also, one thing that I really want to ask is this. Does America have any alternative to its classical negotiations, which consists of do this or else? This has been the subject of negotiations all the time.
Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there an alternative to this kind of negotiation?
Thank you very much for your question. Elliot.
Just trying to be brief. The lack of information is the fault of Iran, says the IAEA. In its report on Iran, dated 28 August, it says, on military dimensions, there remain a number of outstanding issues which give rise to concern, need to be clarified, to exclude the existence of possible military dimensions to Iran's nuclear program. And why do they not have this information? Because Iran will not answer the questions. So the IAEA ends up by saying it is critical for Iran to, and then it goes on to say what questions it needs to be answered. So yes, it is unclear. And it is unclear because Iran is keeping it unclear.
Can I just say, sir, as well, I think it's a very good question. It's the type of question we should have asked more in our own country in March of 2003 before we went into Iraq. But having said that, and having applauded your question, I never met a diplomat of any country who doubted whether or not Iran was trying to develop a nuclear weapons capability, even countries friendly to Iran. It's not just an American assumption. I believe the Russian and Chinese governments are convinced that Iran is heading down that path, and they're not cooperating, unfortunately, with the U.S. and Europe very much. But it's not really a question people are doubting very much, given this record of inaction in answering questions from the International Atomic Energy Agency. But you're right to ask the question, and we need to continue to do that. Last question from a student.
Yeah. My name is Ghanshyam Tiwari. I come from India. Talking about nuclear option or having that power, I was in India when India announced that it had nuclear capability. And I can attest that it's a democratically popular option. So as long as you'll have a democratic regime, there is an easy support base to be built around that. So my question is fundamental to the democracy itself. When we had a contested election here in US in 2000, there was a judicial system, or there was an institution that solved that contest. Iran is trying its own institution, or trying to find its own institution that will resolve its contest. The world did not cry foul in 2000. Why is the world crying foul right now when Iran is trying to find its institutions to resolve its own internal contest?
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed what is the question about.
I would try to restate it as when the United States had a contested election in 2000, the outside world did not interfere. Iran has a contested election. It is using its institutions to try to resolve it. Why is the world thinking of interfering?
Well, because Iran is a weak country and does not have the tradition, the democratic tradition that this country had. And also, Al Gore is not Mir Hossein Mousavi. Mousavi has reacted very differently. So I honestly don't know how to answer your question except to say that the only thing that I remember, and I was in Florida at that time, there were a few people who went to one of the polling stations, not polling stations, one of those vote countings, and started shouting. And I think then the state of Florida stopped the counting of the votes, but there were about maybe 20, 30 angry people. Well, in Iran, it was different. You had millions of people take to the streets of Iran. Iranians took it very differently than Americans did, because it's a very different country. And I think it was one of the most glorious moments of Iran in the past 30 years.
Elliot. Good. We're going to ask both Elliot and Mohsen just take 1 or 2 minutes to sum up what you want to say. What would be the takeaways from this discussion for the students here? What would you want them to remember from this evening's discussion? Mohsen.
Just on the exam? That's the first question.
First of all, I want to thank you again for inviting me.
Pleasure.
But I am very, very disappointed by both of you, because at first you said I am the expert. And throughout you have been arguing with me. And I am sorry, I'm going to leave here really disappointed. But I can summarize everything I have said in 3 or 4 major points. Number one, I think it is very important to continue negotiating with Iran. Number one, negotiating with whoever is in power in Iran. Number two, I think it is in Americans' interest not to get itself entangled in Iranian power struggle. Even Iranians themselves don't know what is going to happen a year or 2 from now. And if they don't know what is going to happen to Iran in a year or 2 from now, I think based on the kind of expertise I have seen in this country, it would be a huge mistake for the United States to put its egg in 1 or 2 baskets at this time. I think they should be staying on the sideline, watch the development in Iran carefully, with the intention of eventually having full engagement in Iran. And my last point is that the most important part of this engagement should be cultural, political engagement, but with one caveat. If the intention of these cultural exchanges is to weaken the Islamic Republic, in other words, if the intention is political, but it is getting a cultural facade, it's not going to work. The Islamic Republic has been in power for 30 years. They're pretty smart. They know the difference. I think it should be a genuine peoples to people. This country, the greatest weapon this country has, it is not its nuclear weapons. Believe me. It is a Jeffersonian concept of democracy. And they don't need to lie about it. They don't need to have political ambitions behind this. I think if it is genuine, and they say it's peoples to people, and the US government does not try to manipulate this, I honestly think in less than 10 years we can have this meeting here, and you're going to see a very different Iran and a very different pro-American population in Iran.
Thank you, Mohsen.
Thank you.
Elliot?
Well, that's a great and hopeful way to end, and I certainly hope it happens. I think, however, in the shorter run, it's always right for the United States to make clear its support for people fighting for human rights and fighting for democracy in their country. It's their fight, but we have to be crystal clear whose side we are on. And I think we've been less than crystal clear in the case of Iran. I think that was the first point I would make. I'd only make one other, and that is, since this is a very serious problem, we can't allow ourselves to dream that it will disappear, to dream that a negotiation that has failed and failed and failed and failed, despite the best efforts of people like Solana and many excellent diplomats, is going to succeed all of a sudden. Bingo, it's going to succeed. It is not. It is very unlikely to. We can't get the sanctions in place. We have been trying under the last 2 administrations and now a third to avoid this terrible choice between Iran getting a bomb or taking military action to stop it. That was the right policy. It is the right policy. You don't have to do anything to be faced with that choice. You need to act to create a middle option, which I would call the diplomacy, negotiations, and sanctions option. But time is running out. It looks like it's failed. It looks like we're not getting the support that we need from the Russians and Chinese and others to make the sanctions tough enough to change Iranian policy. Therefore, we really need to think seriously. When we say, when President Clinton said, President Bush said, President Obama said, President Sarkozy said, Chancellor Merkel said, it is not acceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Do we really mean it? Because if we mean it, we need to think seriously about acting to prevent it in the worst of cases, not just in the best of cases.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the students and everyone else here tonight. I want to thank the students for the intelligence and civility of your questions and of the dialogue. We appreciate that very much. I want to say, just on behalf of the Kennedy School and Harvard, Hillary Rentisi here, is here. She's the executive director of our Middle East initiative. We do have ambitions to expand that initiative towards taking in more Iranian students into our school, here at the Kennedy School. That's part of what Mohsen was talking about, the soft power and smart power of the United States, our democracy. I want to thank these two gentlemen. The stakes are very high for the United States as well as Iran and the rest of the world. I think they've given us a lot to think about in a very intelligent and I think highly effective conversation. Please join me in thanking both of them, and thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mohsen. You did a great job. Thank you.